Nobody expected the human to live through the first week, let alone be trusted with the young. Even the surveillance teams called it madness. A hairless biped barely past adolescence, no armor, no fangs, no threat displayed to speak of. They'd tossed her into the perimeter wild zone of a contested planet and left her there with nothing but a medical kit, a translator band, and a manual titled Diplomatic Mediation Protocols for Interspecies Juvenile Incidents. The manual was torn apart within the first hour. By the cubs. Her name was Maggie Torres. 26. Originally from Bogota, though she'd spent the last decade rotating through every outpost that would take her. People called her crazy, and she usually agreed. But when High Command asked for a human peacekeeper to mediate a border incident on Veruin 9, home to the apex predator species known as the Drentha, she didn't hesitate. What she didn't know at the time was that border incident meant 4 predator cubs wandered into human-controlled territory and triggered an interstellar crisis. The cubs had been sedated and contained before they mauled anyone, but the Drentha Prime matriarch made it clear, if her younglings didn't return unharmed, there would be no war, just a purge. That's when Maggie's name came up. Because, of course, when dealing with creatures whose claws could shred tanks and whose language sounded like a blender full of gravel, you needed someone with emotional resilience, conflict resolution training, and a total disregard for personal safety. Maggie checked all the boxes. The cubs were smaller than adult Drentha but still the size of ponies. Covered in shifting scales and plated with iridescent black carapace, they looked like dragons straight out of a child's fever dream. They had too many teeth and eyes that blinked the wrong way. One hissed constantly. Another wouldn't stop licking her elbow. And somehow they liked her. Or at least, they tolerated her. Which was better than anyone had hoped. For the first few days, Maggie's job was simple: feed the cubs, keep them within the quarantine zone, and make sure they didn't tear each other, or her, to shreds. The perimeter was ringed with active deterrent fields and drone sentries, but even those were just speed bumps if things went sideways. "They think I'm the weird one," she muttered on day 3, holding a chunk of synthetic meat out to the smallest cub, who glared at it like it was an insult. "You're literally eating printed protein from a war criminal cow, and I'm the strange species?" The cub sneezed and knocked the meat out of her hand. Maggie sighed and picked it up again. Her translator band buzzed with a semi-coherent sentence. "This offering smells of lies," she snorted. "That's because it's government issued." The cub gave a low, chirping growl that Maggie had come to recognize as amusement. Not quite a laugh, but close. That was the moment she knew she was making progress. Not much, but enough to give her hope. That night, she sat on a flat stone outside the camp, scribbling into a journal that wouldn't be declassified for another 20 years. A drone hovered overhead, silent but watching. "Day 4. She whispered. "No fatalities yet. No injuries either, unless you count the mystery bite on my ankle. The cubs are bored, which is bad. Boredom leads to testing limits. They're also curious. About me. About my scent, my language, the way I sleep, how I blink. It's like being under a microscope, if the microscope had teeth." She looked out across the jungle-like terrain that bordered both the Drentha and human-controlled sectors. The Drentha hadn't made contact since the cubs were handed over. No communications, no gestures of trust. Just silence. Too much silence. Then came the first ripple. On the morning of day 5, the outer sentry grid flickered. Just a blink, half a second, but it shouldn't have happened. Maggie noticed it while tossing enrichment balls filled with synthetic blood through the enclosure. The cubs were playing tug-of-war with a decommissioned arm prosthetic someone had tossed in as a joke. The moment the field glitched, every cub froze. That's when she knew something was wrong. "Okay," she whispered, standing slowly. "Easy now. Back to the den." The cubs didn't move. Instead, the largest of them, who she'd nicknamed Boulder, sniffed the air and released a deep, resonating hum that sent vibrations through the ground. A second later, the other 3 mirrored the call. Maggie didn't wait. She activated the emergency beacon on her wrist. The nearest human outpost was still a 3-hour drone flight away, and the uplink was weak, but it pinged green. At least someone would know if she got vaporized. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The cubs retreated toward their artificial den, made from reinforced nanosteel, but they weren't afraid. They were alert. Postured like soldiers in training. Maggie crouched beside them, hand on her utility belt. The jungle line across the field shifted. And a shape stepped out. 7 feet tall, maybe more. Muscles like armor plating, scales darker than oil, eyes the color of coals. It was Drentha, but not like the cubs. Older. Hardened. Scarred. A full predator. Maggie's throat went dry. No clearance notice had come through. No comms. No warning. Just a predator casually stepping into restricted human airspace like he was going for a stroll. The cubs didn't react. They didn't growl or run. They just watched. Maggie stood up. She didn't know what instinct made her move, but something primal clicked in her chest, a kind of ancestral madness that came not from fear, but from defiance. She stepped between the predator and the cubs. The air went very still. The Drentha adult tilted his head. His voice, when it came, was like gravel scraping stone. The translator band struggled for a full 5 seconds before producing a result. You protect them? Maggie forced herself to nod. I do. You are not of blood. No. But I've fed them. Tended their wounds. Slept near them. Guarded them. The predator blinked. Once. Slowly. Then you are kin by service. Maggie had no idea what that meant, but she had no time to ask. The predator stepped closer, too close, and knelt in front of her, claws resting in the dirt. I came to test your kind. To see if you would abandon them when faced with death. The elders said you would. She swallowed hard. And if I had? Then I would have erased this camp. Behind her, one of the cubs whined, a high-pitched warble of concern. Maggie didn't flinch. But I didn't. The predator leaned forward. No. You did not. For a moment, silence reigned again. Then the predator stood and did something that froze every drone in the sky, every analyst in orbit, and every ambassador on both sides. He turned away. And left. No blood. No threat. No battle cry. Just walked back into the jungle and vanished. The cubs scrambled out of the den moments later and tackled Maggie like an avalanche of armored affection. One licked her face. Another shoved a chew bone into her boot. Boulder curled around her legs like a scaly cat. She sat down in the dirt, stunned, laughing, half crying. What the hell just happened? No one answered. Because no one expected that moment. No one predicted that a human, a frail, under-armored, underqualified peacekeeper, would become the first outsider in Drentha history to be acknowledged as kin by service. And no one, absolutely no one, predicted what the predator would do next. Not even Maggie. Not even the cubs. Not even the war council that had been watching the whole time. Because sometimes, the smallest gesture rewrites the laws of war. No one knew what to do next. Command went silent for nearly a full day after the predator's visit. The surveillance drones, still running passive monitoring, recorded everything, the crouch, the words, the moment he walked away. But the analysts? The brass? The diplomats? They weren't trained for this. This wasn't in any playbook. Because Maggie Torres had done something that shattered protocol, she'd stopped a confirmed apex from committing an act of war, by guarding the very creatures that could have triggered it. And now, everyone was waiting to see what the Drentha would do next. So was Maggie. She kept the cubs close after that. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. They sensed the change, even if they didn't understand it. They were quieter. More alert. Less roughhousing, more watching. Boulder even stopped chewing through her boots at night. On the morning of the 6th day, something changed again. The cubs didn't wake her with their usual nonsense. No tail thwacks, no scale scratching sounds. She blinked against the dull red of the artificial sunrise and realized the den was silent. Too silent. Boulder? She called. Spindle? Crater? Tail whip? No response. Heart pounding, Maggie scrambled out of her bedroll and stepped into the enclosure. It was empty. But the perimeter hadn't been breached. The sensors were still green. The external drones still hovered in lazy patrol arcs. Everything looked normal, except the cubs were gone. That was when she saw it. A single, clean line of clawed footprints in the dirt, 4 smaller sets, and one massive set leading them, heading toward the northern ridge. Straight toward Drenthe territory. No, 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 Maggie muttered, already moving. She slapped the comm on her wrist. Base, this is Torres. We have a problem. All 4 cubs are gone. Repeat, all 4 cubs gone. Tracks suggest they were led north. Possibly by the adult who made contact yesterday. The line cracked with static, then came a clipped response. Confirmed. Satellite relay picked up movement an hour ago. Drenthe territory is flaring hot. You are to remain in the camp and wait for further orders. She froze. Wait? You want me to just sit here? Affirmative. We don't know if this is a hostile action or a retrieval. Do not engage. But Maggie was already packing her medkit and slinging her utility belt over her shoulder. Torres. That's a direct order. She looked up at the drone hovering above the ridge, her face hard. I'm not engaging. I'm retrieving. Then she killed the comm and started running. The ridge was steep and the air thin. Vines as thick as her arm dangled from trees that glowed faintly in the shadows. The planet was still terraforming, caught halfway between wild death trap and scientific marvel. And Maggie? She wasn't exactly built for cross-country sprinting in 3G boots. But she kept moving. Because she knew something no one in command did. The Drenthe predator hadn't taken the cubs from her. He brought them back. And she had no idea why. 2 hours later, she found the first sign, a drag mark in the underbrush. Then a splash of blue blood on a tree. Her breath caught. She knelt, fingers brushing the still wet stain. Not human. Not Drenthe. Something else. Predator or prey? A rustle behind her made her spin, hand on her shock baton, but it was Boulder, limping, one eye half closed and scales scraped raw. Boulder, she whispered. Oh, baby, what happened? He growled softly, not at her. Behind her. Then she saw it. Another creature. Tall. Thin. Multi-jointed. It shimmered as it moved, cloaked in a field that bent the light around it. It was definitely not Drenthe. And it was definitely not friendly. Maggie didn't think. She lunged at Boulder, dragging him behind a rock just as the thing opened fire. A line of white-hot plasma scorched the space where she'd been. Her baton wouldn't help here. She reached for her flare gun instead, not to fight, but to call for help. A bright red streak soared into the sky. The creature hissed, retreated into the trees, invisible again. But the flare did its job. Within seconds, the jungle shook. And he arrived. The same Drenthe predator, even larger in daylight, slammed through the foliage like an avalanche. He didn't speak. He didn't wait. He just charged. There was a sound like stone cracking under pressure, and the shimmering thing flew backward through the air, slamming into a tree and vanishing in a mess of flickering camouflage and crushed limbs. Silence. Maggie stared. Boulder whimpered and crawled to her lap. The predator turned toward her. You followed, he said simply. I thought they were in danger. They were. He crouched, one massive claw brushing Boulder's injured side. The cub chirped weakly. Your warning brought me in time. The assassins came for the cubs. Maggie stiffened. Assassins? Not from your kind. Not from mine. Outsiders who profit from war. Children spark conflict. Conflict feeds the machines. She knew what he meant. Rogue elements. Third parties who made a living stoking fear. Mercenaries who didn't care which species won as long as blood was spilled and tech was bought. So, this wasn't about the cubs being taken? She asked slowly. The predator growled, low and bitter. It was never about the cubs. It was about you. What? The cubs are symbols. And you, human, are the variable. You guarded them when others would not. You were tested. And so was I. She blinked. Wait, so this was planned? Not by me. Then he stood, motioned with one clawed hand. The rest of the cubs emerged from the trees. Tailwhip was bruised. Crater had a torn flank. Spindle limped slightly, but they were alive. Alert. And they ran straight for Maggie. She held them close, burying her face in their warm, armored bodies. Relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed. Then came a sound, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. The predator was kneeling. To her. You are true blood and spirit, he said. And your presence changes everything. She stood slowly. What does that mean? He rose again, towering, still and silent for a moment. Then, you will come with us. What? The matriarch calls. She has seen the footage. She has watched you stand between fangs and cubs, watched you bleed, watched you protect what was not yours. She now believes peace may be spoken in your voice. Maggie's heart pounded. You want me to negotiate? No. He stepped closer. We want you to speak for the cubs. As kin. She didn't know what to say. The jungle held its breath. And for once, the human was the one who left command waiting. Back at the ridge, a low-orbit transport descended silently, its hull covered in ceremonial markings. It wasn't human-made. It wasn't even Drentha. It was shared. Neutral tech, reserved only for events of interspecies consequence. Maggie turned to look at the predator as they stepped aboard, cubs trailing behind them. You said this was never about them. Then what was it about? The predator didn't answer right away. Then, it was about whether your kind still had a future. He glanced at the cubs. They chose you. And as the ship's doors closed, and the sky began to darken, Maggie realized something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in years. For the first time since the war began, peace wasn't a theory. It had a name. And that name was human. The matriarch was not what Maggie expected. She'd imagined something massive, monstrous, like the predator who had saved her in the jungle, only older and more terrifying. But when the transport opened its doors inside the Drentha capital's central dome, the figure waiting for them wasn't monstrous. She was still tall, yes, at least 3 meters, but carried herself with elegance rather than menace. Her scales shimmered silver in the soft light, her claws polished but sheathed. A ring of smaller Drenthas stood behind her in silence, heads bowed. And her eyes, amber gold and ancient, fixed on Maggie like twin suns made of judgment. The matriarch didn't speak at first. She just looked. And for the first time since she'd landed on Veruin 9, Maggie didn't feel like the strange one. She felt seen. Then the matriarch's voice rolled out, as if it came from the bones of the planet itself. You guarded them. Maggie swallowed, nodded. Yes. You fought for them. I tried. You bled. I did. The matriarch stepped forward. The chamber went still. Even the cubs, tails swishing nervously, fell into a crouch behind Maggie. You could have left them. You were told to leave. Yet you did not. Maggie shifted slightly. I didn't join the Corps to follow bad orders. The matriarch blinked slowly. Then, unexpectedly, a low purring sound escaped her, something like amusement. Or respect. Your species has teeth, it seems. Hidden in soft flesh. Maggie didn't respond. She didn't know how. The matriarch turned, gesturing toward a raised platform. The dome ceiling above began to shift, panels folding away to reveal a massive circular display of holographic memory capture. Footage flickered to life. Maggie saw herself, on the ridge, dragging Boulder behind a rock, firing the flare. Then the predator's charge. Then the cubs huddled around her after the fight. All of it, projected for an audience now gathering in the galleries above, hundreds of Drenthas silently watching from the shadows. They said no human would pass the test, the matriarch said, gaze never leaving Maggie's face. They said you were prey with language. But the cubs chose differently. Maggie blinked. Test? This was a test? A trial of kinship, the matriarch confirmed. Used only when war walks too close to the threshold. We present the young to a potential enemy. If they return changed, if they bond, then perhaps the adults can change too. Maggie's jaw tightened. You used them? You risked their lives to test me? We risked you. That stopped her. You do not know what the cubs did. The matriarch continued. When they returned from your camp, we asked them questions. They did not speak of your tools. They did not speak of your tactics. They spoke of your hands. How you cleaned their wounds. How you wept when one bled. How you made a song to stop them from missing their clutch brother. A lump formed in Maggie's throat. She remembered that moment. Crater had curled into her lap, shivering with fever. She'd sung an old earth lullaby, something her mother used to hum during power outages back in Bogota. I didn't know anyone was listening, she whispered. They were. They always are. Then the matriarch raised a claw, and the chamber darkened again. A second projection blinked to life. But this one was different. It wasn't just playback. It was live. An emergency broadcast. Maggie's stomach dropped. The image showed human troops in exo-armor, firing. Explosions echoed in the background. A squad was pinned near a ridge, outside the neutral zone. Return fire came from somewhere. Not Drentha, but automated turrets in unmarked positions. Command's voice filtered in. Captain Torres, do you copy? We have multiple wounded near Zone 6. Unknown attackers. No Drentha signals detected, but we're boxed in. Coordinates uploading. Please advise. Maggie looked up at the matriarch. It's happening again. Somebody's trying to light the match. And we will not let them. The matriarch stepped aside. A section of the floor shifted, revealing an access pad. It pulsed blue. You know your kind. We do not. Go. Speak. But do not return alone. Maggie hesitated. What do you mean? The matriarch looked at the cubs. Then back at her. Take one. Maggie blinked. Take a cub? Into a human combat zone? You protected them before. Now let them protect you. Boulder padded forward without hesitation. He nuzzled her thigh like a dog. The audience above murmured, some shocked, some approving. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a declaration. When Maggie and Boulder stepped onto the transport, the message was clear. This was no longer just about peacekeeping. This was alliance. Symbolic. Dangerous. Powerful. And untested. The flight to Zone 6 was fast. The carrier cut through the upper thermosphere and dropped like a stone toward the ridge. The moment the doors opened, the smell of ozone and scorched metal hit her like a wall. Human troops were crouched behind cover, under fire from an unseen source. No visual on attackers, just automated fire from hidden bunkers. The kind of operation built to sow chaos and leave no fingerprints. Maggie vaulted out of the craft, Boulder bounding behind her. The soldiers blinked at her in confusion. Ma'am, you can't be here. Wait, is that a cub? Eyes forward, Sergeant, she snapped, crawling into the trench beside the wounded. I'm taking over comms. We're going to fix this, without starting a war. The lieutenant in charge handed her the headset without question. No one argued with a woman who had a Drentha cub watching her 6. Command, this is Torres. Confirm target location. We're under crossfire, and the team's boxed in. Captain Torres? The voice crackled. Where did you? Never mind. Target bunkers identified but not transmitting any known military codes. They're ghosts. Orders are to hold until backup arrives. Maggie glanced at Boulder, who was sniffing the air, tail lashing. Negative. These are provokers. Mercenaries, probably. Designed to make us think it's Drentha tech. She grabbed her wrist pad and began broadcasting a narrow band pulse to Drentha Command, tagging the turrets' signatures. Within moments, the turrets flared red, pinged by a Drentha override signal. They went silent. Maggie exhaled. Weapons cold. The soldiers looked up, stunned. How did you? She stood, brushing dirt off her jacket. I asked nicely. Behind her, Boulder growled at the smoldering turrets, just for good measure. Then Maggie stepped into the clearing, raising both arms. This was not an attack, she said, activating her external speaker. This was an attempt to make us enemies again. We will not fall for it. The broadcast was being recorded. All of it. Back at the capital. On Earth. On neutral worlds. And above, circling silently, were more drones, both human and Drentha, watching. And no one missed the image. A human. Standing tall. With a Drentha cub at her side. Speaking not for herself, but for both species. Maggie never thought she'd be summoned before the Assembly of Three Suns. The name sounded like a cult. Or a rock band. But in reality it was the highest diplomatic chamber in the Galactic Accord, a place where conflicts weren't merely debated, they were dissected, televised, translated into 17 languages, and occasionally screamed about. She walked in alone. No military dress. No armor. No weapon. Just her dusty field jacket. And Boulder. He padded beside her like a bodyguard forged from legend. Fully grown now, sleek, taller than she was, tail ringed with ceremonial silver bands gifted by the Drentha. His scarred shoulder still bore the mark of the jungle ambush. He wore it like a medal. The chamber echoed with whispers the moment she entered. Humans filled 1/3 of the crescent-shaped tribunal. Drentha the second third. The final belonged to neutral observers, reptilian, silicon-based, aquatic, synthetic. No species had ever stood at the center of that amphitheater as a representative of two factions at once. Until now. A chime rang out, and the floor beneath Maggie lit up with soft white light. A voice boomed overhead, flat and artificial, relaying translations in perfect sync. Proceed, Captain Torres. You have the floor. Maggie glanced at Boulder. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. She stepped forward. I was sent to keep 4 cubs alive. I failed. A murmur swept through the hall. They were taken. Led into hostile territory. Attacked. Hurt. Boulder growled softly. But I followed. I protected them. Fought for them. And in doing so, I was shown something I didn't expect. She turned slowly, to face each section of the chamber. I was shown us. A pause. I saw what we were when we first touched the stars, scared, loud, scrambling to stake claims. I saw what we were when we met the Drentha, ready to fire at what we didn't understand. I saw what we were when we abandoned peace because war felt easier. The chamber was still. But then I saw what we could be. I saw it in the way a predator stopped his charge to kneel. I saw it in a cub who shielded me from plasma fire. I saw it in the silence, the choice, not to retaliate when we had every excuse to. She raised her chin. And now I stand here as proof that we are not enemies. We are something new. Something shared. She looked down at Boulder. Not because of treaties. Not because of strategy. But because of trust. The silence held. Then a voice rose. Not a politician. Not an ambassador. The matriarch. Projected from her world across thousands of light years, her holographic image towered over the others like a silver comet. Captain Torres speaks the truth. Heads turned. Mouths opened. The trial of kinship has not only passed, it has evolved. The human is now blood-woven. Her bond with our young was not forged through genetics, but through fire, sacrifice, and time. She is Drentha in spirit. And so long as she breathes, no war shall begin with our claws. A second hologram shimmered to life. Earth's president. Older than Maggie remembered, but eyes sharp. Then let this be marked, she said. The first dual envoy of Earth and Drentha. An ambassador to peace. Protected by her kin. The chamber burst into sound, some cheering, some stunned. One of the aquatic observers let out a high-pitched squeal that cracked 3 viewing windows. But no one cared. Because it was done. An alliance born not of politics, but of loyalty. And they had a name for it now. The Guarding Pact. 2 months later, Maggie stood on a training field on the edge of Earth's orbital station Helix V. Around her, a group of Drentha and human recruits were sparring, awkwardly, hilariously, sometimes aggressively, but always watching each other. Learning. She sipped coffee from a cracked mug and winced as one of the humans tried to leg sweep a Drentha. Didn't go well. Kid's gonna need a new spine, she muttered. Boulder snorted beside her. A chime sounded. Someone approached. Human. Young. The private saluted. Ma'am. Courier packet for you. Direct from Accord HQ. She raised a brow. I'm off the clock. They said it's urgent. And confidential. She took the envelope. It was old school, paper ink sealed with wax. Inside was a single message. We need you on Veridin. Cub conflict. Species unknown. Situation unstable. Bring him. Maggie looked up at Boulder, who was already watching her. His tail swished once. Well, she said, tossing her mug aside. Time to make history again. The transport streaked across the stars. Maggie sat in the forward cabin, checking her gear. Not weapons, not really. Just tools. A translator. A medkit. A lock of hair tied to her bootlace, from the first cub who ever fell asleep in her lap. Boulder sat opposite, preening lazily, though she knew better. He was ready. And somewhere in the black, a new world spun in silence. With new cubs. New threats. New choices. The predator who had once tested her had said it best. Peace does not survive because it is written. It survives because someone guards it. She smiled to herself. Good thing, she whispered. We're damn good at guarding things. The stars outside burned quietly. But in the dark between them, something was watching. And for the first time in generations, it hesitated. Because it saw the human. And the predator beside her. And it remembered what happened last time.